Are you a huge fan of Disney princesses, romantic fairy tales, and long blonde glowing hair with magical powers? Then you've come to the right place, because today I'm going to show you how I made my Tangled inspired Rapunzel cosplay. This all started 3 years ago when I felt the urge to make a cosplay based on some fan art I saw online. I reached out to the artist to ask for permission to make a cosplay based on their design, but unfortunately I didn't hear back from them. So instead I just came up with my own design and started my journey of making my first Disney cosplay, my first ball gown, my first elaborate wig styling, and my first project with electronics. I will split the making of my Rapunzel cosplays in 2 parts. This part will be about how I made the dress. The second part will be about how I made my lightweight and glowing Rapunzel wig. So let's start right away with cutting out the fabric. This was enough fabric to fill my parents' living room. It must have been 6 meters of fabric I got for each skirt. This was enough to make a 3/4 circle skirt. I used the light pink fabric for the first overskirt. I also cut the fabric for the main skirt. My dog was also there to supervise, but he slept on the job. A lot. So I cut the half circle part in 2 to insert the quarter circle piece in the middle. This made for perfectly symmetrical seams. To sew the skirt pieces together, I used French seams. They are my favorites when it comes to making clean seams. I just had to place the fabric on top of each other with left sides facing each other and sew along the edges with enough seam allowance. Then I folded the skirt so the fabric would face each other with the right sides and pressed the seam. Next I made the second straight stitching line along the seam so that the raw edges would be encased. I pressed the seam once again and was rewarded with beautiful clean seams. Next I made the gathering stitches along the waist to gather the skirt a bit, since it was a bit wider than my waist. Then I sewed the main skirt together the same way. Of course I had to include pockets. They are a real game changer and they make cosplaying at conventions so much easier. To finish the skirt I had to dip dye the overskirt first, so I set this aside for the moment and started on the bodice. I used the pattern Butterick 5935 pattern B and altered it a bit. This fabric is meant for a strengthening layer, by the way. I still had it in my stash and it's a nice and sturdy cotton. You won't be able to see it in the end, so the color doesn't really matter. Once I had all my bodice pieces cut out, I carefully pinned them together and sewed along the edges. Once that was done, I cut out the bodice pieces of the leftover fabric from the overskirt. With that, I had all the pieces together I wanted to dye. I got the Simply Cool textile dye in lavender lilac. It's perfect to dye natural fibers. Fortunately, I could do this messy part outside in my parents' garden. I filled a box with hot water and added the dye. I took my bodice pieces first and just put them into the water. Then I took my skirt and dipped it into cold water first. This helps to achieve a smooth gradient. Next, I dipped the skirt into the dye, sometimes going a bit farther so there wouldn't be too much color at the upper part of the skirt. I also hung it on the clothes horse and rinsed the fabric with a bit of the dye from the top. I think this really helped with the gradient. By the way, I just figured out that the thing you put your clothes on to dry them is called a clothes horse. Is this the right word? Because to me it doesn't make sense. It just feels very wrong. Anyway, after I felt that the fabric had been in the dye long enough, I took it inside to rinse it in the shower. I hung the fabric on the clothes horse to dry. I was already very pleased with the color gradient on the skirt and with the purple color in general. Back inside, I continued to work on the bodice. I made the interfacing from the leftover main skirt fabric and sewed it together like I did with the other bodice part. Because this is the lining, I also made a modesty panel. This is just a large rectangle folded in half that is sewn on with a straight stitch to the opening in the back. This prevents the skin from showing through the lacing in the back of the bodice once it is done and ready to wear. Once the interfacing was done, I made one more overlay layer for the bodice from this stunning golden cobweb tulle. I placed it on top of the dyed bodice pieces except for the front piece. I just forgot that I don't need an overlay for the front piece, so I cut it by mistake. I pinned the tulle overlay to the dyed pieces with stay stitches so they would behave as one layer. Then I could also sew this layer of the bodice together. To make boning channels, I took the lining and folded the seam allowance to the side and sewed this down. Then I could take my plastic boning, cut it to the right length and insert it into the channels. Here you can see how I prepared the modesty panel. I just folded the rectangle in half and sewed around the edges, but leaving open a little gap so I could turn the modesty panel inside out. After I pressed it with my iron, I could pin it to the right side of the lining and sew it down with a straight stitch. Now all 3 layers of the bodice were done and ready to be sewn together. This is the lining, then the additional layer I did to strengthen the bodice, and finally the outer layer. I placed the layers on top of each other and sewed along the edges. After that, I worked on some embellishments for the bodice. I wanted to make a fake lacing in the front. Therefore, I got golden rings in multiple sizes. First, I connected 2 larger rings with a small ring. Then I placed the rings along the front of the bodice and stitched down one of the rings of each 3 rings constellations. Through the other larger ring that hadn't been sewn on, I was able to thread a golden cord through later. Next, I started to work on the closure of the bodice. I was getting impatient by the time because I so desperately wanted to try it on properly. I used eyelets for the closure, therefore I had to punch what felt like 1,000 holes along the back opening of the bodice. Then I could insert the eyelets and press them with an eyelet plier, or whatever you call this tool. I haven't worked on the skirt for a while, so let's take a look at that. I already sewed the overskirt to the main skirt at the waist, but I wanted to have a zipper in the back, so I had to cut it open a bit to insert the zipper. I'm not gonna lie, this step was so scary. I carefully pinned the skirt layers together in the back so it wouldn't shift when I cut it open. Of course, I had to add the waistband too before I could sew in the zipper. So I took the waistband I cut earlier, folded it in half, pressed it and sewed it onto the waist of the skirt, encasing all the raw edges. Next, I took the zipper and tried to sew it in as carefully as I could. I'm not the greatest when it comes to zippers, but luckily this one turned out fine. Here I finally put on the bodice and skirt for the first time, still holding the bodice together in the back because I didn't have anything to lace it with yet. The next day I got a hoop skirt and this already makes the skirt look so much better. It all is just a trust the process journey. I also got a ton of pink glitter tulle from Anika cosplay, from which I was going to make the sleeves and yet another overskirt. I even tested if I could dip dye the tulle too, but of course the fabric dye did nothing to the synthetic fibers. By this time my semester break was already over, so I was back in my tiny student apartment. The mission was to hem the skirt now that I finally had the hoop skirt and could cut it to the right length. Fun fact, I didn't hem the skirt once, I didn't hem the skirt twice, but I hemmed it a total of 3 times until I finally had the right length so I would stop tripping over the hem. This was such a hassle because every time I used a decorative stitch to hem the skirt and it took literally hours to work around the whole skirt. I also finally got my hands on lots and lots of golden bias tape, which I sewed along the edges of my 2 overskirts. I felt like the bodice could also use some extra embellishments, so I cut 4 different shape pieces from thin EVA foam. The shape was inspired by the embroidery Rapunzel has on her dress in the Tangled movie. I primed the foam pieces with flexi paint and started to paint it with golden acrylic paint. But I was unsatisfied with the opacity and the light color of the golden paint, so I spray painted it instead. This looked so much better, but I still felt like this looked too plain, so I later added more motifs with puff paint. I actually did this a while after I had finished the cosplay, but I'm showing this here already, so don't be confused if you can't see the puffed paint later in this video, because it hadn't existed at this time. Painting the motifs proved to be a real pain because I used puffed paint I still had from my childhood, and it had been a little dried out. I had to squeeze the pen so hard all the time that my wrist began to hurt so bad. Oh, the things you do to save money on your cosplays. This was not worth it, by the way. I should have just gotten new paint instead. After I was finished with the paint job, I wanted to reinforce the EVA foam with some wire. I roughened the surface with sandpaper, so the hot glue I used to attach the wire would better stick to the foam. Next, I took care of the attachments. Therefore, I glued some magnets to the foam and also to the insides of the bodice. I also covered the magnets with some fabric that I could much better glue onto the foam. I was so afraid that the magnets would just rip off because they are so tiny and they don't provide much of a surface to be glued down. I also used small pieces of fabric to connect two pieces of the foam embellishments. Then I took the bodice, opened the seam at the edges a bit and placed the magnets between the layers. At the front of the foam pieces, I glued on a hook that I could just hook into the golden trim of the bodice. Setting this aside, I started to work on the shoulders and sleeves. I made the pattern myself and used the lighter pink of the glittering tulle and a thin pink cotton from my stash. I also made another overlay from the cobweb tulle that I stay stitched to the pink cotton. Then I could sew all the pieces together. Here I made the shorter sleeves from the cotton. These are the shoulder parts that would stay open in the back. Of course, I tidied up all the raw edges. Next, I sewed the larger sleeves from the tulle. I didn't sew them close all the way down, just about the length of the short cotton sleeve. Then I inserted the short sleeve into the tulle sleeve and made a stay stitch along the shoulder. Afterwards, I could sew the sleeves into the shoulder part. I also wanted to add embellishments to the sleeves, so I drew a pattern on some tissue paper. On top of that, I placed some noodles made out of warbler. This was going to be like bangles sitting on my upper arms. I later had some struggles with this because it kept breaking apart. I continually made the bangles smaller until I just ditched them completely, but they looked so pretty while they lasted. I also spray painted the bracelets with golden spray paint and then went through the struggle of hand stitching them onto the sleeves. You can also see here that I already sewed on the shoulder part to the bodice, which I also encased with golden bias tape. I had to pin the shoulders to the bodice while wearing it. I also had to do this in the back by myself and then lace myself out of the cosplay without losing any pins or scratching myself to death on the needle points. I'm now very glad that I didn't record this procedure because just no. And ouch. I used the golden trim from the bodice to decorate the skirt a bit more. The trim also served to hold the overskirt in place so it wouldn't just keep slipping towards the back. Time for more embellishments. I made little suns out of warbler the same way I made the bracelets. I also made teardrops with polymorph. This was a bit of a struggle because it was very difficult to get a smooth surface with this material. No matter how I pushed the polymorph into the silicone mold, I would still encase some air at the bottom of the mold. Anyway, I wanted to put the teardrops on a chain, so I made 2 halves of a teardrop, reheated the surfaces and placed a chain on top of 1 half and placed the other half on top of that. Once the polymorph fully cooled down, I primed the teardrops with wood glue and continued with the second teardrop. I spray painted the suns and teardrops with the same golden spray paint I used for everything else to match the colors. I then sewed all the parts onto the cosplay and was finally able to put everything on. This cosplay consists of so many layers. There's the hoop skirt, a petticoat I also made out of tulle, the skirt that already consists of 2 layers, one more sparkling overskirt, the bodice, the foam pieces, and of course the wig. I will show you in another video how this was made. And yes, it does light up. With this, the cosplay was done, so enjoy the reveal! I was already able to wear Rapunzel to many conventions and even enter 2 cosplay competitions with her. I'm so happy that my friend Shura made the most amazing Flynn rider to match my Rapunzel. She is a real shapeshifter, so you should definitely check out her profile. Another thing that makes this cosplay so special is that every time I'm wearing her, there are so many little kids who are staring with me with pure admiration in their eyes. They give me the feeling of being a real Disney princess, and all the little interactions I get to have with them are so precious. I mean, they can also be very awkward because I don't know what to do with children, I don't know how to talk to them, but still it's just the cutest thing ever. So here it is, the making of my Rapunzel cosplay. I'm actually proud of myself that I really edited this video after 3 years and that I could share this with you. This was also one of my New Year's resolutions, making less cosplays and taking the time to finish my project. Meaning after a cosplay, I'm planning a photo shooting and actually editing the YouTube videos. This is already the second YouTube video I made this year and I couldn't be happier about this. The first one is about how I made Signa from Belladonna, which also serves as my Scarlet cosplay from Caravel. When I started to make YouTube videos, I couldn't have imagined how much effort it is to edit a YouTube video. I usually have around 50 hours or more of footage that I have to view, cut and piece back together, and it just takes so long. I also have to write a 5-page script which I have to record in a language that isn't even my native language. So if you have any advice on how to make editing YouTube videos easier and more efficient, I would be so happy to hear it. Otherwise, we will see each other in my next YouTube video where I will probably show you how I made my lightweight and glowing up Rapunzel wig. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss the next videos. Until next time, bye!